of Sharia base their argument on the claim that it is objective morality because it comes from the creator of the universe. Therefore, whatever he says is true, and by their definition, this is objective morality. We cannot understand why it is like that, but since he's saying it, therefore it is objective and inherently good. But when we scratch the surface and put it under the microscope of reason and logic, it is anything but objective in nature. So let's examine this claim. Objectivity means something that is absolutely true in its claim, regardless of conditions, feelings, or opinions. Basically the opposite of subjectivity, which relies on interpretations, limited understanding, opinions, and is conditional. So I've thought about it for a very long time, and I'd like to see Daniel's view on that as well. If we are to take morality in this case called Sharia from an outside agent, in this case Allah, on the claim that it is objectively good, then there are four options. Option one, Allah is only capable of giving out good commands, consequently he is incapable of giving out evil commands. If we assume this premise is correct, then indeed morality does become objective, I'll give you that, but it violates other claim traits of Allah himself. For example, he is incapable of giving out evil commands, meaning he is not omnipotent. He's just a calculator. Like a calculator can't tell you 2 + 2 = 5, so we can trust him. He doesn't have free will, because even if he wanted to give an evil command, then he can't do.
I really was baffled at his approach to this debate. Like, why is he talking about objectivity versus subjectivity of Islam, of the Sharia? That is not really the debate topic. If he wants to, like, basically it's, imagine like someone is having a debate on the issue of, healthcare, right? Is privatized healthcare better, or single payer system, or public healthcare? What is the better healthcare system for a nation? Imagine that kind of debate. And then one side of the debate starts talking about, well, what is objective morality? Is health something objective or subjective? Like, it's just way beyond. Like, this is a much more theoretical level. It's a much more abstract level, and it's strange to me why he wanted to go down this path. And he's not even giving a coherent argument. I think he's trying to make some version of the Euthyphro argument. So I was very confused at this point in the debate. Like, what is this guy talking about?
Do it as he pleases. He can't lead people astray. He can't give them wrong directions, causing them to burn in hellfire, which is against Allah's traits, as per the Quran, chapter 14, verse 27, which also entails that Allah leads people astray as he wills, meaning he can give them wrong directions, which is kind of an evil command, knowing that the person is headed towards an eternal abyss, which also violates in turn Quran chapter 7, verse 28, which says he can't give evil commands. So it is safe to say that this is not the case with Allah, and this premise doesn't fulfill all the characteristics of Allah. Now, option two, which is more likely, a lot of Muslims take that one. Allah is capable of giving out evil commands, but he chooses not to, as it is against his nature to give evil commands. In this case, his condition of omnipotency is restored. If we assume this premise is correct, then we could expect good directions from Allah, because it is not in his nature to give wrong directions. But that would require faith, which is inherently the opposite of objectivity, because objectivity requires us to be able to test, verify.
No, why is faith the opposite of objectivity? Why? He just asserts this. He says, here, let's see, faith is the opposite of objectivity.
The Muslims take that one. Allah is capable of giving out evil commands, but he chooses not to, as it is against his nature to give evil commands. In this case, his condition of omnipotency is restored. If we assume this premise is correct, then we could expect good directions from Allah, because it is not in his nature to give wrong directions. But that would require faith, which is inherently the opposite of objectivity, because objectivity requires us to be able to test, verify, and measure. As per the premise, all the commands.
For objectivity, you have to test and measure. Test what? It's a moral value. How do you test moral values? You look at the results, maybe, like, what does this moral value result in the world? Maybe this is like the categorical imperative. He's giving a Kantian argument. Maybe this is a Kantian categorical imperative type of argument. We have to measure the results of the moral commands that God gives, and that way, and only then, if we have this ability to test the moral value, then it's objective. He needs to better define objectivity and subjectivity, because there's just widespread confusion on this. It's like the bane of my existence and the bane of anyone who has studied philosophy, basically. People talking about objective versus subjective, because people think that objective means something that's real and subjective means something that is like mental or something that you feel. But certain things that you can feel are also real, like your feelings are real. The fact that I'm sad, the fact that I am, I think a certain thought, like I'm imagining a red apple right now. Is that an objective fact or is it subjective? So people don't understand these distinctions. The way that it should be understood is that subjectivity is opinion based. Like, I prefer chocolate ice cream. You prefer vanilla ice cream. These are preferences. That's subjective. There's no fact of the matter about it. But, is killing wrong? That's just a moral value, and it's objective. It is objective. Whether it is correct or not, that is a separate issue. Like, you can question its objectivity, but that doesn't make it subjective. Do you see what I'm saying here? It's not in the category of subjective truths. This is also a Kantian point, actually. Talking a lot about Immanuel Kant, who is also a white supremacist, by the way, and one of these Enlightenment thinkers. But he's a very influential German philosopher. But with Kant, his critique of pure reason, his critique of judgment, and so forth, he makes these kinds of points, which are good points, that moral claims are not subjective, like your opinion on some art, or your opinion, your preference, rather, for certain kinds of foods or certain kinds of art or whatever. Moral claims are not like that. Moral claims are objective. Like when you say that this is wrong, you're making a claim about reality. Now, people can differ and say that, well, your claim is not justified by evidence, or your claim is not rational, but you're just questioning, whether it's real. You're not questioning that it's in this category of things that could possibly be objective. So same with faith in God. Does God exist? People differ on the answer to that. But God existing, that's the objective truth. Or it is an objective truth, but it's in this category of things that can possibly be objective. It's ontological question. So this is like very nuanced and complicated, but Harris is just butchering all of this. And usually a lot of these ex-Muslims that are using these kinds of arguments, they don't understand actually the words that they're using. Like they've just maybe heard someone talk about this and they're trying to, implement it for their own purposes without understanding. So it just looks stupid.
Commands might actually be all good because he chooses never to give an evil command, but it can't be called objective. You could argue that in your limited wisdom, Harris, you might not be able to see the bigger picture, and what seems like a wrong direction to you might actually be a good direction, such as the case Allah ordering Abraham to sacrifice his son. Abraham accepted it as Allah's good command because of his faith. He had no way of knowing that Allah had a different plan unless he had faith in him, which he did. So in principle, he required faith, not evidence. And hence, for us to determine a command is objectively true, we need to be able to test it. For example, if you told a blind man that the moon emits white light, it might actually be objectively true, but before the blind man, it would require only faith to believe in it. The blind man is confined by his limited vision, as us humans.
But that doesn't make, just because he's blind doesn't mean that the moon emitting light or being made of cheese is suddenly subjective, just because one person doesn't have access to evaluate that. I'm sorry. I'm confused by what he's trying to say. He's just mixing up everything, and it's just a complete mess. Same with any truth. Like, give me like the fact that there are electrons. Okay, this is an objective truth, right? According to science. There are electrons and protons and neutrons and quarks, and we have the standard model of particle physics. But you and I don't necessarily have the mathematical training or the physics training to actually understand what that means, what an electron means, and what is like the wave function, and what is Heisenberg's uncertainty principle and Schrodinger's wave equation and all of this. We don't have the mathematical or the physics training. Well, I mean, I do have the physics training, but maybe we're not at that level to really understand. So, or some people might have just reject and say, no, electrons and protons, I've never seen these things. And the math is, as far as I'm concerned, is just wizardry, is just witchcraft. So I don't accept. So they're blind to these kinds of scientific facts. or these theoretical facts, does that mean that suddenly the status, like this is no longer in the realm of objectivity? So he's just confused. And about objectivity as well, I make this point a lot. It's important to keep in mind that objectivity as a term and a concept has a specific history in post-scientific revolution Western philosophy. The idea of being objective. And there's a really good book called Objectivity. It's by Peter Gallison. He's a historian of science. He's at Harvard. He was actually my professor for 1 year. And Peter Gallison talks about the historical development of this concept of objectivity. And it's post-Enlightenment, basically. And post-Enlightenment, you had certain inventions, like the camera, or you had an invention. I mean, the camera is the main thing, actually, because it creates an image that is independent of any person, any eye. And this idea of having an image and being able to see something, quote unquote, without actually having an eye, this had major theoretical implications and philosophical implications, cultural implications. And this is where the idea of objectivity, seeing without one perspective, like the nature of things in and of themselves, which is something found throughout Western philosophy, it originates at this point in time, and previous philosophers and thinkers didn't have this notion of objectivity. They had the notion of truth, the notion of reality. They had this notion and all of that was tied with God, because God is ultimately the main view, the main, source of truth. What is real is tied intimately with God as creator. You can't separate truth and reality from God. But if you create a device like a camera that is not connected to any brain, is not connected to any eye, then it can serve this kind of atheistic project of talking about reality without God. It's a delusion. Okay, you can't have reality. You can't have even the concept of truth without God. And we can talk about this all day. Read John Gray. He's also an atheist, but he makes this point. He says that truth is actually a religious concept, and you can't really have a concept of truth without religion. And he mentions Christianity specifically, but Islam is included in that as well. But yeah, objectivity is a long conversation about that. We can talk about it. I love that subject, but someone like Harris doesn't understand it. He doesn't know the history, so he's using it in a very casual, unsophisticated way that's misleading.
Humans are confined by a limited wisdom. But for us to believe it's objectively true, we'll need to be able to measure it ourselves. Although this is the most agreed upon option, but it also violates Quran 14:27 and Quran 2:7, as Allah has purposefully made people blind and put a seal on their heart, so they can't even see His wisdom, just have faith in Him. But then, in other place, Quran says, chapter 15, verse 75, look at the signs I have left for you. It is literally asking a blind man to see. How can I see if you have blinded me? Option 3, God can give any command, and by virtue of it coming from Him.
And this is not related. He's talking about things like taqdeer. He's talking about, accountability before Allah, the omnipotence of Allah. There's so much that's written about this philosophically by Muslim scholars, by the scholars of Kalam, the scholars of Aqidah. There's a huge tradition in Islam, intellectual tradition in Islam, dealing with this kind of question, these kinds of issues. Christians also have. Arguably, Christians and Jews were influenced by the Muslim philosophers and mutakallimun and Aqidah scholars on this issue. But this is a known topic, and that's not the topic of the debate. We're not having a theological debate. We're having a debate about human rights. So he's just so off topic. I don't know why he would even prepare this, because he's reading a script. So why would you prepare that in advance?
it just becomes good, which basically means that God can turn good into evil and evil into good. This is a logical fallacy, because for good to become evil and vice versa, these two entities have to exist independently. This is like making a four-sided triangle. You can't do that. It's either a triangle or a square. Just like that, objectively, it's either good or evil. Creating evil only to turn it into good defeats the purpose of creating evil in the first place. For example, Allah allowed Adam's children to have sex with each other and produce babies, only to turn it into an evil action later on. If we look at it in absolute terms, then it can't both be good or bad at the same time.
No, like this is also non sequitur. Like he's making, like the moral rule that Allah would has or would have. Okay, just let's think about this logically. Any kind of moral command is contextual or has shurut, has conditions, right? So, for example, eating pork, eating pig, you would say that Islam has prohibited eating pork, right? And this is an objective rule, very clear rule: do not eat pork. But that's kind of a caricature of what the rule actually is in Islam. The rule is, do not eat pork if there's other food available. If there's other food available, do not eat pork. If you're in a situation where there is no food, then, and you're starving, you're literally going to starve to death, then it's actually permissible. You are allowed to eat pork as a Muslim. Drink alcohol, same thing. You will literally die if you don't drink the alcohol. Then you can. It becomes halal for you. Okay, so all of these moral commands have conditions, and they are applied in a context. So the rule: do not have relations with blood siblings. Do not have sexual relations with your siblings if you're not the children of Adam, and Allah has not allowed that. So that's the condition. So the rule hasn't changed. It's just that the conditions and the context have changed. The rule is the same. It hasn't gone from being good to evil. You know, if we were in another situation where there were only the existence of the human race that Allah has created depends on blood siblings to have those kinds of relations and have children, then arguably the human race depends on it, then that behavior would be justified, or it would be moral according to Islam, according to any kind of moral system actually. So again, the moral philosophy is a very important subject. You have to have like some kind of familiarity with these topics.
It's either evil or good. This proposition creates further problems. Once we admit that God can turn evil into good and good into evil, then, as I said earlier, it breaks all bases of rationality. Every other rational criticism of any other faith or proposition becomes irrational, because anything can happen. I wonder why Muslims make fun of Christians with the concept of God is the Father and the Son. If we assume God can violate basic fundamentals of reality, then he can be the Father and the Son at the same time, and Christian faith becomes perfectly irrational and rational at the same time. But Muslims don't buy that. This proposition also violates the Quran, as Allah himself says in the Quran, chapter 7, verse 28. Allah gives no evil command. So this verse might put him back in the option 1, but we already know that that option doesn't fulfill all the other characteristics. Now, option 4 is Allah just gives evil commands and not good commands. I think we can all agree that that's not the case. So if you look at it, honestly, Allah doesn't...
Yeah, I think the answer is that Allah is giving good commands. He could give evil commands if he wanted to, but it's not in his nature. Allah is Al-Barr. He's the source of all good. Allah is Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim. Allah has all the beautiful qualities, all of these sublime qualities of goodness and perfection. And so he's not going to issue. That doesn't contradict his omnipotence. So, like, what is the argument here? And what the point about objectivity, is it objective or not? It's nonsense.
Fit in any of these options. Why? Because it's so contradictory that you can't fit this box in any circle.
Hi.